We left off, today's daf is Yud Gimel. We left off on Yud Beis Amud Beis, right by Rabbi Eliezer. 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. So we have actually a very interesting daf today. So the Gemara says the following: Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yimachru. So if you remember again, Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that if somebody is machdish nechasav, so and within the nechasim, within the property are animals, so lemaisa the Zecharim, the male animals, are sold off for the purpose of olos, and the female animals are sold off l'tzarchei shlamim. But remember, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is what? Stam hektish lebedek habayis, and therefore all the monies fall into the bedek habayis fund. So it says the Gemara the following: Rabbi Avo b'shem Rabbi Shimon Lakish, time with Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's logic? Because the pasuk says Daber el Aaron ve'el Banov. Pasuk says over here in Vayikra, Daber el Aaron ve'el Banov. Now I will say again, this is one of the pasuk by Nidarim and Nidavos, but the Gemara is actually darshaning the middle of the pasuk. Daber el Aaron ve'el Banov. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, speak to Aaron and his sons. Asher yakrivu laHashem laola, and talking about an animal that you will offer up as an ola. So the Gemara darshans hakol karev arla. What that teaches us is that according to Rabbi Eliezer's position, and also we already saw this alluded to yesterday, that technically speaking, every animal could be offered up as an ola. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the second to last line of the Tiklin Charitin, left-hand side of the page, actually bottom of the page. Hakol karev ola. Kidleel ubimas Nisan Basra Rabbi Eliezer Garcin and Velo Rabbi Eliezer the Hubar Plukta. So says what we said before, that Velo Svirle Hakol Karev Ola. So what we said yesterday was this idea that all animals, technically speaking, have a shaykhus in carbon ola. That ola is a general category that could encompass many things. For some things, could take on kedushas ola, even if they can't be offered up as an ola. But the point is, Torah is telling us that this is an expansive category. Lirtzon chem tamim zocher. So what does it mean that you have to offer it up? Lirtzon chem tamim. Lirtzon chem means according to your will, tamim, complete, zocher male. Yachal afilu ofos. So you might have thought that should even include ofos, birds. Tamlomar babakar velo ofos. Therefore the Torah says no babakar and not ofos. Rabbi Yirmiyah v'Rabbi Bun Bar Chia havun yasivun va'amrin tamon. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Taimid Rabbi Shimon shekein nekeva shebaov kshera lava ola. So also the reason of Rabbi Shimon, which we spoke about earlier. Again, if you take a look, again, Tiklin Charet, the second to last line. Tamon Amar Rabbi Shimon Gabi hifrish nekeva li ola. Remember we had this case yesterday where you separate out a female animal for the sake of ola. This Tziril the Rabbi Shimon oset timura. Remember again, Abba said normally an ola could only be a zachar, but yet Rabbi Shimon said that if you separate out in a keva as an ola, it is subject to the laws of timura. Now, under normal circumstances, the only way you could create a timura is if the animal that is the original animal is a kosher carbon. The novelty of Rabbi Shimon's ruling is, even though you can't use an akeva as an ola, yet it could still create a temura situation. If you remember again, what was his logic? His logic was uperish tamim shekain kshera nekeva ba'of ola ve'im kain matzino b'shem ola nekeva l'hachi chalak dusha va'oset temura. So Rabbi Shimon's logic was because there is an olas nekeva, and that's what? Olas ha'of. So once you have a case of where you have an ola that is in a keva, therefore the Maisa, every in a keva could take on some level of ola sanctity. The Ka Amar Hachin, and so too again he said like this. Rabbi Eliezer said like this as the Ka Amar Hachin, and yet so again earlier Rabbi Eliezer seemed to side with Rabbi Shimon, and yet here he's espousing the sheet that we said above, top of Yud Gimel. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kai Maisei Kaha. It is justified to take this position. The Amar Rab Shmuel b'Shem Rabbi Zira, Kol she'eni yechola likarev lo hi velo dameha. Lo kitsha elehekdish damim. Anytime you have an animal that is sanctified, and the animal cannot be sanctified, not itself, nor can you use its funds for that same sanctification, it simply has hekdish damim. I will say hekdish damim, as we spoke about before, means it has monetary value. It has monetary value. So any time that the carbon itself can't be offered, by definition, it has hekdish damim. Va'at, and Rabbi Eliezer, you say va'at amrut yos, you say that it is correct. Lakrivo in at yochol dichsiv babakar velova ofos livdosa in at yochol she'in laof piyom. So we'll say again, the Gemara says in this case of Olas Nekeva, what are you supposed to do with it? On one hand, again, you can't go ahead and redeem it because the oath doesn't have pidyon. Lefum kain tzarich meimar lo kid she'el kidushas damin. Therefore, it leads us to only one possibility, which is that in this particular case, the animal will simply have kidushas damim, financial value, without actual sacrificial value. Chavriya b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Ivu bar Nagri, Amar Kumi Rabbi Ilah b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Taima dehin Tanya, ve'im kol behema tmeya, asher yakrivu mimenu karban laHashem. When the pasuk says every behema tmeya from every behema tmeya you shall not offer it up as a karban to Hashem. Ma Talmud lomar tmeya. I will say, what does tmeya mean? Now, under normal circumstances, what tmeya means is non-kosher. So it'd be strange for the Torah to tell us that a non-kosher animal can't be offered up as a karban, meaning that seems to be quite intuitive and obvious. That I don't know that I actually need a whole pasuk to teach me that. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you what you do with it. Kol she'ina ra'i likarev lokan velokan Kol she'ina ra'i likarev lokan velo b'makom acher. Eino oset temura. So we'll say, so says Rabbi Zeira. I'm sorry, I just skipped a line. I'm sorry. Ma Talmud lomar tmeya afilu tmeya ba'osa Hashem. Rather, what tmeya means is, so we'll say, tmeya is like code. It's code for disqualified. An animal could be disqualified for a whole variety of reasons, but in this particular circumstance, the disqualification that we are focusing on is tmeya ba'osa Hashem. Tmeya ba'osa Hashem is Rabbi, it can't be offered up for this particular category. So it's tmeya, it's the same way that a behema tmeya is excluded from certain sacrificial laws, so an animal of the wrong type is also excluded from certain sacrificial laws. And I will say again, remember, the reason why this is all important is because we're trying to figure out if a person indeed consecrates a particular animal, but that animal is not fit for the purpose for which it was consecrated, what happens to that animal? So again, the simplest example is one to use from the Gemara. I makdish, I sanctify a female animal for an olah. Well, an olah is not brought from a female animal. So the shaila is, what happens to that animal? So remember, there are two possibilities. What are the two possibilities? Either A, it just has Kedushas Damim, which just means Bedek Habayis, or possibility B is what? That no, it does have Kedushas HaMizbeach. It does have altar sanctity. But it can't be offered. You're right, so what would you do with it? Remember, either way you're selling this off. The Shaila just is what? What do you do with the money? If it just has Kedushas Damim, then the money goes to Bedek Habayis. The money goes to the general fund. If you hold that it has some level of Kedushas Haguf, because now remember, why would you say that an Olas Nekeva has some level of Kedushas Haguf? Because we saw before the opinions that said because there are certain cases where you could bring an Olas Nekeva. If that's the case, then what Rabbi say? Then Lamaisa, the monies themselves would have to be used for the purchase of other karbanos. So that, just to understand, that's the fundamental machlokes that's unfolding over here. So matmeya. So what does it mean? That's me. I feel tmeya ba'os Hashem. The kasha, but this raises a question. Bedo ksiv, because about this it was stated ve'ha'emid ve'ha'erich. And I will say ve'ha'emid ve'ha'erich means is essentially erech values, that you evaluate the particular value of an item. Now over here, what the Torah is talking about is the following. The Torah says, "Kol behema tmeya asher lo yakrivu mimenu karban laHashem ve'hamid es habehema lifnei hakohen ve'erich hakohen osa bein tov bein rabek." So this is talking about, again, if a person sanctifies an animal that is not fit, that's behema tmeya. So what does the kohen do? The kohen is ma'arich. The kohen evaluates the value of the animal, and it's that amount of money that becomes pledged to the Beis Midrash. Now, also the fact that the Torah says that v'ha'emid v'herich, that you're evaluating, indicates to us that what? That it does indeed have Kedushas Haguf. That it has Kedushas Haguf. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Zeira b'shem Rabbi Eliezer, lo amar kain. He didn't say like this. Ella v'im kol behema tameya asher lo yakrivu mimenu karban laHashem. When the Torah says any behema tameya, that you, so with any behema tameya, you shall not offer it up as a karban to Hashem. Kol she'eno ro'oi likariv lo kan velo b'makom acher ena oset timura. So we'll say what this teaches us is the following: that in order for an animal to be totally removed from the category of sacrificial sanctity, it has to be what? The kind of animal that is not offerable anywhere. Anywhere. That's a behemoth tameya. You can't offer it under any circumstance. And I will say there are kosher animals. There are certain kosher animals which are just not offered. They're just it's not used for karbanos. Now the Gemara also brings up over here The other ramification of this, I will say, is Temura. Remember, Temura, once again, is where you sanctify a particular animal, and then what? You have a change of heart, you decide to use something else, you try to swap it out. Now, under normal circumstances, the halach is a penalty. Both the original animal and the swapped animal are both kodesh. Now the Gemara is suggesting that's only true if what? If the originally designated animal was fit for carbonic use. But if the originally consecrated animal was not fit for carbonic use, then there is no temura situation. So the Gemara says, any animal that is not fit to be offered here or in any other sacrificial circumstance, eino oset temura, does not create a temura situation. Yatsisa nekeva. So the exception to also is what? Is in a keva. Why? Because in a keva, although again, if you set aside in a keva for an olah, you can't offer it up as an olah, but since the keva is what? Usable as an olah in a different situation, namely where Rabbi say, olas ha'of, since even though you can't offer it here, nevertheless it is fit to be offered somewhere else. I will say again, understand what that means. So just play this out. It's very interesting. If I went ahead and I sanctified a female animal as an olah, so I can't go ahead and offer up that carbon. So now let's say so what's my idea? Oh, so what am I going to do? I'm going to switch out my nekeva for a zachar. So essentially, what am I doing? I'm doing temura. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that both animals are kodesh. The nekeva could have never been offered as an olah. Couldn't be offered as an olah here. But since again, a nekeva does have shaykhs to the concept of olah, albeit again in a different circumstance by oath, therefore it takes on olah's sanctity. Because it takes on olah's sanctity, it's subject to the laws of temura. Just an interesting idea. So the Gemara says, the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Rabbi Avon v'Rabbi Bun ba'un kumei Rabbi Zeira. Rabbi Avon and Rabbi Bun asked the following question in front of Rabbi Zeira. Hari haroveya v'hanirva she'inon ru'uyin likariv lo kan v'lo b'makamacher. So most like there's a halacha that says that an animal that essentially sodomizes a human being, or an animal that is sodomized by a human being, both those animals are not fit for sacrificial use. You can't use those animals. But I will say, interestingly enough, if you go ahead and you, let's say I take that animal and I say, okay, this is my animal, this is the animal that had this experience, and then what happens? And now I sanctify it as a carbon, and now I decide to swap it out for something else. What's the halacha? They're both temura. So, which is strange. Why? Because an animal that is rovea or nirva is unfit for anything. You can't use it in any circumstance. Now, based on what we just said before, the only way something should be fit for, or something should be subject to the laws of temura, is if lemaisa it's subject to the laws of karbanos in some circumstance. Here, it's totally mufka. It's totally removed from karbanos. So the Gemara says, "V'hari hein osin temura amar lun af anilo amarti ella temeya mamish." So he said, lun means, take a look at the tikkun chanatin. It's actually interesting. Tikkun chanatin writes over here the following. No tikkun chanatin. He was the covenant I was looking at before. Okay, now it doesn't matter. So it says the Gemara, Amar Lun, Afani lo amarti ela tmeya mamish. So he said again, when I was talking about this case, I was talking about a case of Tmeya Mamish. That in Achinami, what he's saying over here is, I agree with you. In this case, actually, Rovea and Nirva would not create a Temura situation, because indeed, Lemaisa, they are removed from everything.
Wasn't that the original question, though?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't that the original question? We didn't need to know Tmeya.
We didn't need to know Tmeya.
Because we did to whatever there's another passage that tells you can't bring korban from something Tameh.
No. That's the whole point. Because Tmeya, when we first look at it, we assume it's a non-kosher animal. So now what we're saying is no. Tmeya actually means something that is not generally fit for sacrificial use. An external disqualification. Because remember, this animal that's nirva or rovea could be the right min for carbon, yet because of an external circumstance, it cannot be used. So now Lemaisa, we're saying it can't be used for sacrificial service, and therefore Lemaisa also it can't be used for, and it's not subject to to Temura. Says the Gemara, V'kashya, Bedok Siv V'he'emid V'he'erich. But the Gemara ends off with the Kasha. The Gemara says, nevertheless, interestingly enough, the Gemara seems to indicate that even these, or the Torah seems to indicate that even these behemos tameos still have what? Still have some level of physical sanctity, because the Torah uses the lashon of v'hemid v'herich. So the Gemara leaves that with a kasha. Says the Mishnah, achos lelamid yom misharines halishka. Once every 30 days, literally it means they would evaluate the chamber. So what does that mean? Take a look at the Tiklin Charatin for just a moment. It's on the bottom of the page, right hand side. Misharnes halishka, kovin shar liyenos ushmanim, ad lamed yom. So Rabbi said what happens is the Beis Hamikdash would enter into short-term 30-day contracts with merchants for wine and for oil. See, we'll see certain things they bought in bulk because it would last, and certain things they had to buy on a more regular basis. So wine and oil, they entered into 30-day contracts with merchants. Look at the Tiklin Charatin. V'agizbarin lochin mehen mashatzrichin ba'osa hazman. And the gizbar would take whatever the gizbar is the temple treasurer, would take whatever they needed during that time. V'im nisyaker hamekach ein mosifin damim. V'im huzal lochin kafiazo. So we'll say, we actually already spoke about this yesterday. This idea, we called it Sa'ad Dalid. Then what would happen? So for example, let's read the Mishnah. So he says the following. Once every 30 days, Misharnes Halishka. So the Misharnes Halishka literally means that the Beis Hamikdash treasurer would work out deals, would work out buying arrangements with the merchants. Kala Makabel Alav Lisapek Salasos Me'arba. So we'll say, let's say for argument, now we're going to get into the actual nature of these transactions. Let's say the Beis Hamikdash contracted with a particular merchant to buy 4 sa'ah of wheat for a selah, for argument's sake. 4 sa'ah of wheat for a selah. So if you take a look, all right, 4 sa'ah of wheat for a selah. So what happens? We'll say, let's say amdu mishalosh. Let's say now the price of wheat appreciates. So that what? You could only get 3 sa'ah for a selah. Nevertheless, Yisapek midalit. So the halacha is that the merchant, meaning again, so these deals are not in any way tied into market fluctuations. They're fixed deals. On the other hand, mishalosh va'amdu midalit, yisapek midalit. Now again, on the other hand, if the original contract was what? To buy 3 sa'ah for a selah, and then what? The price of wheat goes down. So now in the market you can get 4 sa'ah for a selah. The Beis Hamikdash has the upper hand, and in fact, it gets what the market is willing to offer. Suppose, in other words, what the Mishnah is saying is that the price is only locked in when that's for the benefit of the Beis Hamikdash, when the price of wheat appreciates. But Lamaisa, if the price of wheat goes down, the Beis Hamikdash gets the benefit of these new valuations. I'm sorry.
After Kenyan, even?
Correct. This is this wouldn't work for anything they took already. They wouldn't get like back saw, but going forward they'd be able to use the new amount. Why? So now the Mishnah espouses a principle. Shiyad hektish al ha'elyona, because ultimately the Beis Hamikdash always has the upper hand. So you also have to understand something. You'll say to yourself, but it puts the merchant at a disadvantage. Right? So the idea is people who are doing commerce. First of all, I think there are 2 things that play over here. Number 1 is that it's a privilege to supply the Beis Hamikdash. It's a privilege to supply the Beis Hamikdash. So the concept ultimately that a person is not going to make as much money as a person would in another venture really should not matter. Also understand that it's huge bulk. So to land one of these contracts, it probably was worth it for the merchant, because remember, the big risk comes in a situation where the price of wheat goes up, right? Where the price of wheat goes up, so you're still so again, price of wheat goes up in the market. You could get 3 sa'ah for a seller, but you contracted for 4 sa'ah. That's where the real. But I think with such a bulk contract, assuming the market remains somewhat stable, and again, remember, you could forecast market volatility with grain, with wheat. How? It's very simple. Crop, right? Meaning, again, you could see, what the rainfall is, what the crop coming in. So again, I'm assuming there's some level of agricultural volatility. I'm sorry?
That's why they did a monthly basis.
Correct. So right. So worst case scenario, you're only locked in. Although again, you'll see they only did it really for monthly basis for perishables. We'll see actually even though he uses the example of wheat over here, we'll see wheat was actually done long term.
Use it in your advertising.
I'm sorry?
You could use it in your advertising.
The 100%. We said we're Yashan, we're Chadash, we're Glat. Even God eats from us. Yeah, it's I'm saying I think that's definitely. I'm not sure how much people entered into this for financial motivation as much as the incredible, exceptional covet. But again, still landing a contract like this, assuming market prices remain stable, must have been a huge potential windfall. Anyway, weiter. So Yad Hekdesh ala Yona. Im Hisliya, listen to this. Im Hisliya soles. Let's say the flour became wormy. So again, obviously, if the flour becomes wormy, you can't use it in the Beis Hamikdash. What's the halacha? Hatliya lo. So literally, the worminess is the merchant's, which means that the merchant takes full responsibility for the product. Ad v'im hichmitz yayin. Similarly, if the wine went bad, the wine spoiled, turned to vinegar. Hichmitz lo, it turned to vinegar for the merchant. Eino mekabel ma'osav ad sheyehe mizbeach meratzon. This is an amazing statement because the merchant doesn't get his money until these items are actually used on the mizbeach, which is another way of saying that the merchant retains full responsibility over the objects. So under normal circumstances, so a seller only retains responsibility over an object until when? Until it's delivered to the buyer. Once it's delivered to the buyer, again, unless otherwise stipulated, once it's delivered to the buyer, that's it. So the buyer makes a key and it's his. The unique part of the Beis Hamikdash is not only does the Beis Hamikdash get the upper hand in terms of prices, but responsibility for loss remains with the seller literally until the moment that the object is used in the Beis Hamikdash. Look at the Tikkun Charatin. It's incredible responsibility. Look at the Tikkun Charatin. So first of all, he says, the Tikkun Charatin points out, it doesn't literally mean that they don't get their money. Meaning, the Beis Hamikdash pays the merchants at the time that they take the produce. But under normal circumstances, the giving of money would affect the transaction. Here, it's as even though they have physical possession of the money, it's as if they don't receive the money until when? Until the time that the object is actually offered. So I'll say awesome responsibility. So now not only does Beis Hamikdash get the benefit of market trends, even though it wasn't stipulated like that in their buying contract, but now again, vendor retains all responsibility for any type of damage to the object or any type of ruination of the object until the point that it's actually used. But look what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, Tani b'shem Rabbi Shimon, miyad hayu mekabel es ma'osein. So literally it means they would receive their money immediately. Now I will say, obviously, I want to be clear. Even though the Mishnah makes it sound like they only get their money once the object is offered, the Tikkun Charatin already clarified that is not the case. They're getting paid up front. What Rabbi Shimon says is, you know what, and they could take that money to the bank already. Why? Because the HaKohanim zrizin. Because the Kohanim were zrizin. I will say, what does it mean the Kohanim were zrizin? There was never a case where the flour turned wormy or where the wine turned to vinegar. Because I will say that only happens how? When it sits. So the idea is the zrizus of the Kohanim is that they would get the produce. And again, remember, these particular items also, they're buying in smaller quantity as well. They're not buying a year's worth of wine. They're not buying a year's worth of oil. So Lamais, again, they bought what they needed. The Kohanim were zoris, and the Kohanim, so because of the zrizos, there was never any kind of spoilage. Interestingly enough, the fine. We'll do the interesting one later. Hadron Alach Perak Hatruma. Fine. New Perak.
Amen.
All right. So says the halacha. Says the Mishnah. Abba said this is really fascinating now because what's amazing about this is you get a window into the world. When we think about the Beis Hamikdash, so we think about the Leah L'Regel. You come up, you're with your family, you offer your kabbanos. What's amazing is the Beis Hamikdash is a huge entity that there are so many different things going on. Meaning, it would be amazing to find out from here, but like what the annual budget of the Beis Hamikdash was, because it's clear that there's a huge amount of support staff. There's a huge amount of buying that happens. It's just, so now we're going to see how the actual Beis HaMikdash works. Take a look at the Mishnah. Elohein HaMemunim. These are the people who held appointed offices in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, again, remember, The other thing to also remember is when we think about the Beis Hamikdash, we assume, of course, there were employees. Who are the employees of the Beis Hamikdash? The Kohanim. So what's interesting to see is the Kohanim are, I won't say a small part, they're a big part, but they are only one part of the workforce of the Beis Hamikdash. There is a whole administrative part of the Beis Hamikdash that really has, Kohanim are eligible for those jobs as well, but Lamaisa, they were not normally filled by Kohanim. So listen to this. So these are the people who held posts in the Beis Hamikdash. Who are they? Yochanan ben Pinchas al ha-chosamos. Yochanan ben Pinchas was in charge of chosamos, was in charge of tokens. Now we'll see Rabbi say what tokens are for exactly. Okay, Achia al hanesochim. Achia was in charge of libations. Rabbi say again, what that means is, as we've already seen before, a person would often come to the Beis Hamikdash, and people don't always want to schlep stuff with them. I don't want to bring an animal with me. I don't want to bring flour, or oil, or wine with me. So remember, we talked about this. There was the Beis Hamikdash gift shop, and in the Beis Hamikdash gift shop, you could purchase all of your carbonic needs. Again, but be reminded that what? It's going to be at a premium, right? It's not going to be. It's like buying the snacks at the movie theater, right? So you're. I've heard. So you are going to have to pay a premium on it, but nevertheless, people are willing to pay a premium for convenience. So Achia ala nasokim, Masya ben Shmuel ala payasos. Masya ben Shmuel, we'll say, was in charge of the lotteries. Now again, look at the Tiklin Charatin. The lotteries for what? We'll see this later on. Lahoros seder hagorolos mi yiske ba'avoda zu'umi ba'acher. So we'll discuss the fact that the way Kohanic responsibilities were divvied up changed over time. But at least at some point in time, they used a lottery system. Used the lottery. So you have Masya ben Shmuel was in charge of the lottery, which distributed the various responsibilities to the Kohanim. Pesachya al hakonim. So Pesachya, I will say, was Siu Pesachya, it wasn't just a moment. Pesachya was in charge of the Kohanim are the bird pairs. Remember, there are certain karbanos that have to come from birds, and so he was in charge of the birds. Pesachya zehu Mordechai. I will say, who is Pesachya? He's Mordechai. Now, there's a big machlokes as to who this Mordechai is, but many, in fact, hold that it's the Mordechai of the Mordechai and Esther story. So Pesachya is Mordechai. And also that also is a clear indication that what? That you don't have to be a Kohen to go ahead and hold these positions, because Mordechai was from what Shevet? Mordechai was well, right, it's machlokes, right? Because he was a Yehudi and Ish Yemini. But Pasha says, assume right now he was from Binyamin. One thing is clear, which is he's not a Kohen. See, here you have Pesachya in charge of the Kinin, and what happens? Why do they call him Pesachya if his name was really Mordechai? Because he would open things up, the darshan, and he would explain them, V'yodea b'shivim Lasson, and he knew 70 languages. I will say, it doesn't mean like he was a nudnik opening everything up. What it means, what it means is exactly Torah. He was able to explore and understand and explain deeper concepts of Torah, and he knew 70 languages. So to him, nothing was closed. He opened everything. Barachia al cholim me'ayim. Ben Achia was in charge of the Kohanim with stomach disorders. Now we'll discuss Kohanim apparently suffered from ongoing indigestion, which we will discuss. Nechunya chofer sichin. Nechunya was in charge of digging ditches. And we'll say what this was for water sources. Meaning he was in charge of making sure, this was especially important during the times of the regalim, to make sure that there were enough water wells for the pilgrims who were coming up. So he was in charge of making wells. Gavine karus, Gavini was the crier. We'll say, remember again, they had to make announcements in the Beis Hamikdash. We'll see, again, the crier did a number of different things. One of the things that he did was he would be the one who would announce that Barakai, that it's dawn. It's dawn. He would be the one who announced for the Kohanim to get to work. We'll discuss each of these things in the Gemara. Ben Gevra al Ni'ilas Sha'arim. Ben Gevra was in charge of closing the gates at the end of the day. Ben Bavi Memuna ala Pakia. Ben Bavi was in charge of the wicks. So somebody had to be in charge of the wicks for the menorah. Ben Arza ala Tzaltzal. Ben Arza was in charge of both sides. Tzaltzal, if you look at the Tikkun Charatin, something very interesting. Tzaltzal, symbol belaz. He was in charge of the symbols. With a C. Kishayu shomen kolo hayu maschilin halavim b'shir. So it's very beautiful. The way the Levian would begin Shira was how. So apparently Ben Arza would what do you call it?
Clash.
Yeah, clash.
Crash, okay.
Clash.
He would bang them together. Yeah, he would go ahead and clash the cymbals, and they would begin to sing. Hugros ben Levi al-Ashir. Hugros ben Levi was in charge of the Levitic choir. Beis Garmu al-Ma'aseh Lechem. So also this we saw already yesterday. The Garmu family were in charge of Lechem Aponim. Beis Avatinas al-Ma'aseh Ketores. The Avatinas family were in charge of Ketores. The Elazar ala Paroches. Elazar was in charge of the Paroches. So also remember there was required upkeep. There was required upkeep for the Paroches, for the curtains. Upinchas hamalbish. And Pinchas was the one who was in charge of Kohanic wardrobes. Now, Malbish literally means he was going to help the Kohanim get dressed. We'll see, because the Big Day Kahuna are actually somewhat complicated. Sometimes you needed another person to help you with certain parts. So he was in charge of Kohanic wardrobe. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chizkiya Amar Reb Simon, V'Rabbanan, Chad Amar Kshirei Dor Vador Balim Nosalein. So we'll say, interestingly enough, you have over here, Rabbi Chizkiya says the name of Rabbi Simon, and the Rabbanon. One say that who are these people who are mentioned over here? So some explain that the people mentioned over here didn't necessarily all live at the same time, but rather these are the great people that held these positions over the generations. So they didn't all live together. They held this position over the generations. The Charna Amar said, Charna Amar, Mi Shahaya Ba'osadar, Mana Masha B'doro. Charna said, no, and therefore, according to this first approach, according to Rabbi Chizkiya's approach, all of the people mentioned over here in the Mishnah were all great tzaddikim. All didn't live at the same time, but all great tzaddikim. Charna says that no, the Tana just listed all of the people who lived in his particular generation. Man da'amar k'sheirei kol du'arvadar ba'limnos al kulan hu omer zecher tzaddik livracha. So the one who says that the people listed over here were the ones ultimately in his generation. So therefore, we would use the appellation of Zecher Tzadik Livracha. They're both saying, again, we're not going to get into it now, but the Tikkun Charatin points out that these names are also mentioned in two Mishnayos in Yuma. There are two Mishnayos in Yuma that go through two lists of people. One group of people that are listed as Zecher Tzadik Livracha because of their good contributions, and another list of people that are remembered for B'Shem Rishoim Yirkav, the name of the wicked shall rot, because they didn't do such good things. So the Gemara is trying to figure out where exactly this list of names fits into the other two lists of names. So everything depends on how you feel the Tana arranged these names. If these people did not all live at the same time, the Tana just picked out the greatest people from all generations, then obviously Zecher Tzadik Livracha. If at the end of the day he's just quoting the people who lived in his generation, then it's quite possible that what? That they weren't exceptionally righteous. So he goes on, Al kulanu omer v'shem Sham Yirkav, V'almin ne'emar zecher tzadik livracha al ben katan v'chaveirav. So also according to this approach, again, remember, I'm not going to get into these Mishnayos in Yuma, but again, the Mishnayos in Yuma compare two different categories of people. So apparently, the people mentioned in this Mishnah over here, our Mishnah over here, are nothing necessarily to write home about, with the exception maybe of certain people whom the Mishnah identifies as great people, namely like Mordechai, like Pesachia. But otherwise, there's nothing so special about these individuals mentioned in the Mishnah. And who would be an example of a tzaddik? Ben Katan. Ben Katan is one of the people mentioned in the Mishnah and Yuma as being an exceptionally righteous individual. Amud Beis. Omer Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah says, Ksiv lochin achalik lo berabin v'es atzumim yichalik shal. So Rabbi Yonah quotes the pasuk from Yeshayahu, and the pasuk says, therefore, I shall go ahead and give him his portion in the multitudes, and the strong will go ahead and divide the shalom. The shalom means the treasure. Who does this refer to? Ze Rabbi Akiva. This refers to Rabbi Akiva. Shehiskin medrash halachos v'hagados. Rabbi Akiva is the one who went ahead and arranged medrash halachos and hagados. So I will say again, remember, medrash, if you take a look at the Tikkun Charatin, look at the Karban Ha'ida. The Karban Ha'ida says the following. He says, Shehiskin medrash, Shedarshin osan berabim, va'af zeh shemosr nafsho ala Hashem, hayilo chilik b'toras Hashem k'Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say the Gemara says that this individual who is given his portion on the multitudes and who is strong and divides the treasure, this is Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva was one of the individuals who went ahead and essentially organized Torah Sheba'al Peh. So he organized Torah Sheba'al Peh into what we call Medrash Halachos and Haggados. The Yesh Omrim, others say, Elo Anshe Knesses Hagidola Tiknu. No. When it comes to Medrash Halachos and Haggados, that the Anshe Knesses Hagidola arranged. Elamati Kein Zeh. So what did Rabbi Akiva organize? klalos upratos. Rabbi Akiva was the one who organized the concept of klal uprat. I also remember one of the they call them hermeneutic principles. I don't know if that helps anyone. That's the Yud Gimel Midos of Rabbi Yishmael, right? The hermeneutic principles. So one of them is klal uprat. So klal uprat means that sometimes the Torah will say something generally, they'll make a specific statement, and how do you understand those two? So Rabbi Akiva is the one who went through Kol Torah Kula and organized all of the klal uprats. Something amazing. Am Rabbi Avo, Ksiv, Mishpachas Sofrim Yoshvei Ya'avetz. Tziril say quotes the pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, and the Divrei Hayamim says there was a family. Now Sofrim could mean scribes, but in its most basic etymological level, Sofrim means someone who counts. Someone who counts. There was a family of counters who lived in Ya'avetz. Matamad Lomar Sofrim. What does that mean that they were Sofrim? Ela sha'asu es haTorah Sefuros. Rather, Shabbos said this is actually referring to Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And what happens? Anshe Knesset Hagdolah are individuals who made the Torah Sefuros, into lists. What does that mean, into lists? For example, Chamisha lo yichum truma. They said 5 people shouldn't. Just give you understand what's happening over here. The Gemara now is discussing individuals who organize Torah Shabbat Peh. Right? So one of the ways that you organize Torah Shabbat Peh is how? By creating lists. Remember, there were still times when Torah Shabbat Peh was oral. So when you went ahead and you had that, having lists was a much easier way to remember certain things. So what does it mean? Mishpachas Sofrim Yaushve Ya'avetz, that there was a family of counters who lived in Ya'avetz. That refers to these individuals, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, who organized Torah Shabbat Peh into lists. And the Gemara is now just going to give some examples of these lists. Chamisha lo yichum truma. 5 people. There are 5 individuals who are not permitted to separate truma. Hey dvarim chayavin bechala. There are 5 things, 5 different types of grain that are chayiv in chala. Chamesh esrei nashim b'tros seyan. There are 15 women who exempt their co-wives from yibum. Shloshim v'sheish krisos b'torah. There are 36 instances of karis in the Torah. Shlosh esrei davar ne'emru b'nevela sa'ov. There are 13 things that were said about the carcass of a bird. Ha'ofatar. Dalid avos nazikin. There are 4 primary categories of damages. Avos malachos arbam chasar achas. There are 40 minus 1, 39 categories of forbidden labor on Shabbos. So we'll say again, all the Navi is referring to over here is that Chazal were called Sofrim. So why are they called Sofrim? Because they arranged many of these numbered lists for us that are supposed to be helpful in remembering halachic concepts. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said the following: Ksiv, the Ezra HaKohen has Sofer. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so again, the pasuk over here is, this is in Ezra. So the Torah says, Le'ezra HaKohen HaSofer, Sofer, Divrei Mitzvos Hashem V'chukav Al Yisrael. So it uses the word Sofer twice by Ezra. Ezra HaKohen HaSofer, and then Sofer, Divrei Mitzvos Hashem. So why does it have to say Sofer twice? Ma Talmud Lomar Sofer. Why does it have to say Sofer twice? Ella, Keshem Shahaya Sofer B'divrei Torah, the same way that he counted words of Torah, he also counted the words of the sages. Rabbi say again, remember, what does counting over here mean? Counting means organizing. Organizing. The same way that he organized the words of the Torah, he also organized the words of the Chachamim. So if you take a look at the Tiklin Charatin says the following. Keshem Shaya Sofer B'divrei Torah, Kacha Yisofer B'divrei Chachamim. V'Seifa Dekra, the end of that pasuk in Divrei Hayomim says, Divrei Mitzvos Hashem. He Torah Shebechsav, Kimoshe Kasav, Sofer Mahir B'Torah Hashem, V'chukav Al Yisrael, Zeh Torah Shabbat Peh. So Tilin Charatin just points out that the pasuk itself alludes to Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shabbat Peh. Shetorah Shebechsav Gamlu Umos Nichtava, Be'er Heitei B'Shivim Lashon, Ukimoshe Kasav La'asid Mevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sev Torah B'Cheiko. Klum yesh bachem magidzos the klal Torah Shabbat Peh. But also, interestingly enough, the Tiklin Charatin just points out over here that the need to organize Torah Shebechsav is not just for us, but the need to organize Torah Shebechsav is for the nations of the world as well. Because Torah Shebechsav, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, should be accessible for the Umos Olam, for the nations of the world as well. That's why, interestingly enough, we know that already Moshe Rabbeinu arranged that the Torah be written in all 70 languages when the Jewish people enter into Eretz Yisrael. So this is just interesting. So the arrangement of Torah Shabbat Peh is for us, but the arrangement of Torah Shebechsav, meaning when we see arrangement, the explanation of it, the practical organization of it, is not just for us, but for the nations of the world as well. Reb Chagai, b'shem Reb Shmuel bar Nachman. Listen to this. Harishonim, the earlier ones, they went ahead. Charshu means they plowed. Vizoru, they planted. Nichshu, they weeded. Kischu, they trimmed. Adru, they hoed. Katzru, they harvested. Amru, they gathered. Dashu, they threshed. Zaru, they winnowed. Bararu, they separated. Tachnu, they ground. Hirkidu, they sifted. Lashu, they kneaded. Kitfu, they formed, meaning that's what you do when you form a loaf. Afu, they baked. Va'anu, ein lanu ma'lechol. And we have nothing to eat. Now I'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at the Tikkun Chadatin for just a moment again. So he says over here, Charshu, chashiv tesvav melachos hapas, lefi shator nikreis lechem. Now I'll say, what does this mean? Now this, of course, is figurative. What we just enumerated over here are the 15 steps necessary in the production of bread. Now why are we talking about bread over here? Because Torah is called lechem. Torah is called bread. So what is he saying? So what is he saying over here? Our forefathers, they toiled. And as a result of their toil, what did they have? They had bread, meaning they toiled and they accomplished great things in Torah. But anu ein lanu lechol. So take a look at the first wide line. No, this is not the right one. I'm sorry. So he's saying over here, our forefathers toiled, but they had bread to eat. We toil and we have nothing to eat. So I'll say what he's lamenting over here is the decline of the generations. That our forefathers are so much greater. Nothing was easy for them, but yet when they toiled, they recognized fruits of their labor. We toil and we don't see the same level of results. Rabbi Abba Bar Yona Zamina B'Shim Rabbi Zeira in Havun Kadmo in Malachim Anan B'nei Anash. If earlier generations were like angels, we are like people. In Havun B'nei Anash Anan Chamrin. And if they were like people, then we are like donkeys. Another way of saying that we're not as great as previous generations was we have this concept of Niskatnu Hadoros, that the further we get from Har Sinai, ultimately, again, the more generational holiness or sanctity ebbs away. So he's just comparing, for our forefathers, they worked hard, but they realized results. We work hard, but we don't have pas. If they were men, we're donkeys. If they were angels, we're men. We're just not as great as previous generations. Amr Abmana Bahi Shaita Amrinan Afilu Kechamarte Dra Pinchas Ben Yair Lo Idamnino. Ramana says the truth is in our generation, we're not even like the donkey of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair. What happened to the donkey of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair? Listen to this. Chamarte Rav Pinchas Ben Yair. The donkey of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair ganafta listoi balayla. So what happens? So thieves stole the donkey of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair at night. Avarta tamira gabon tlasan yamin. They hid the donkey by them. I guess they were hiding out in a cave or something. So they hid the donkey by them for 3 days. What happens? Velo ta'amaklum. The whole time the donkey would not eat anything. When the donkey was being held by the thieves. Basar tlasa yomin. After 3 days, the thieves deciding, you know what? Mechazarta. Let's give this donkey back. Amri afkinon minhacha. Get it out of here. Dilo temus gabon. Because what's going to happen? The donkey's going to die here. It's going to smell up the whole cave. So you know what? Forget it. Donkey's not eating. We don't want any dead donkeys on our hands. So just send it back. Just send it back. What happened? Afkuna. So they released the donkey. Azles v'kamisla al tara demara. The donkey comes and it shows back up at the gate of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair's house. Sharias minahekes. It began to bray. So meaning he began to announce its arrival. Amar lun pischun lahada alufta the islat tlos yomid all time. So Rav Pinchas Ben Yair runs down. He says to his servants, "Quick, open up the gate." Literally, let in alufta means this unfortunate one. Aluvasa. Let in this unfortunate one. Because she hasn't eaten for 3 days. Apparently he was able to see that the donkey didn't eat fur for 3 days. So what happens? Paschala, they open the gate for the donkey. Va'ala sled came in. Amar lun yahavalahu klum teichal. Amar lun yahavalu. So what happens? So Rav Pinchas Ben Yair said to his servants, "Quick, feed the donkey. Klum teichal. Yavun kumas sa'orin. Velo ba'is lameichal." So they put barley. They put barley in front of the donkey. The donkey wouldn't eat it. Amar le Rebbe. Lo ba'is lameichal. So the servant said to Pinchas Ben Yair, "Rebbe, the donkey's not eating anything." Amar lun mitaknin inun. So it literally says, have you fixed the barley? And I will say, the Tikkun Chanatin says, meaning have you sifted the barley? He says below psolas, meaning if the animal might, is there impurities in there, or are there stones in there, pebbles in there? This donkey, mamish, so they just sift the barley. I'm sorry. So they just sift the barley. Amrulayin. They said yes. This is good animal grade barley. Amrulun. Va'arimtun damyon. Did you take care of the demai status? And I both say again. Remember, demai is if you would purchase produce from an Ama Aretz, from a person who was not knowledgeable. So there was always a concern that an Ama Aretz does not properly tithe his produce. So therefore, if you buy produce from an Ama Aretz, that's called demai. Demai is a contraction for damai. What is this? Meaning, we don't know, did he tithe it or didn't he tithe it? It's possible he did, it's also possible that he didn't. So what do we do with demai? We normally retithe it. We retithe it just to be on the safe side. So now Pinchas ben Yair said, if this is demai produce, have you retithed it? Well, the servants say, Amrulei, Rebbe, lokein alfon Rebbe. Rebbe, you taught us differently. Halokeach zera lebehema, kemach laoros, shemen laar, patimin admai. Rebbe, you taught us that essentially the only time you have to retithe demai produce is when? Is lemaisa, again, if you are purchasing it, if it's going to be used for human consumption. But if you are purchasing demai produce, either for animal feed, or for, let's say, to use as they used to use kemach, they used to use flour to tan hides. Or if you purchase demai oil as fuel for your candle, patim min admai. So Rebbe, you taught us that the only time you have to retithe demai is when it's going to be used for human consumption. But if it's being used for animal consumption for any other purpose, you don't have to retithe it. So Rebbe, so we shouldn't have to retithe it. So what did he say? Amar Lon, Pinchas says, what do you want me to do? My na'avid. What should I do for this unfortunate creature? Al garma sagin. Because ultimately, again, apparently, she is more machmir than I. Right? So what he's saying over here, because she's machmir again, she's machmir on herself. So what should so the Gemara is pointing out, we're not even like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair. That again, I will say, understand what that means, by the way, also, is that sometimes when Kedusha is palpable, so Kedusha permeates every aspect of the world, including the physical world, including even the animal kingdom. So what it's saying over here is the Kedusha of previous generations was so intense that even the animals were influenced by it. We don't even have the same sensitivities as the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair. So what do they do? Va'ariman damyan va'achal. So Australia is a good ending. They ultimately separated out once again the Trumas and Maisrus from the Dmai, and the donkey ate. Psachya alakinis. So also remember again, we said Psachya was in charge of the bird pairs, and we said Psachya was Mordechai. Bo'u re'eh ma gadlu kochu shel osa ish. See how great the power of this man was. Shel osa ish poseach dvarim v'darshan. He would literally open things up. and he would darshan them. So in Tikkun Chanatin says, Poseach dvarim hanisgarim uskurim. He would go ahead and be able to open up matters that were otherwise closed and obscured. Okay? Weiter. Yodea ba'ayin Lasson. He knew 70 languages. Tani, Sanhedrin sheyesh b'shnayim sheichol medaber. The kulan ru'uyin l'shma. Hariz ru'uyin l'Sanhedrin. If you have a Sanhedrin, remember, the Sanhedrin Agadol was comprised of 72 judges. So what would happen? In order for the Sanhedrin to be a formally constituted Sanhedrin, you had to have at least 2 people who were able to go ahead and speak. Now, remember, 70 languages is just an expression, right? What it means is all languages, all known languages. So you had to have at least 2 people who would be able to go ahead and speak all languages, and as long as everyone else knew to understand those languages. So everybody had to understand the various languages. Only 2 had to speak. I was saying the reason you needed this is why? For cross-examination of witnesses. Witnesses could come from anywhere, and that could be witnesses because of the new moon. That could be witnesses in capital cases. There can't be a language barrier, nor can you rely on the services of an interpreter. So that's why, remember, there had to be at least 2 members of the Sanhedrin that were well-versed linguistically in every language, both to speak it and to understand it. Everyone else had to at least understand it. He goes on. Harizuriya. So this, if you have 2, as long as everyone else can understand, that group is fit to be a Sanhedrin. However, Gimel, Harizabeinonis. If you have 3 people who are able to go ahead and speak every language and everyone else understands, that's an average Sanhedrin. Dalid, if you're able to have 4 people that are able to speak every language while everybody else understands it, Harizu Chachma. Oh, then that is a wise Sanhedrin. Ubiyavne, and in Yavne, also remember Yavne is the area to which the Jewish community relocated to in the aftermath of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Hayu bought Dalid. There were actually 4 men on the Sanhedrin who actually were versed in every language and spoke it and understood it. Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Ben Chachinoi, Rabbi Eliezer, Ben Masya. Amr Reb Chisda, Pam Achas Yav She'eretz Yisrael, V'lo Yada Mehechan Lahavi Omer. Both say one time there was a terrible drought in Eretz Yisrael, and what? They didn't know where they're going to be able to get barley from the Karbana Omer. So what happens? Listen to this, very interesting. V'haya taman chad ilim. There was one man who was mute. Dahava yahiv chad yadei al gagos. He put one hand on the roof of his on the roof. V'chad yadei al tzrifim, and he put another hand on a hut. So what's like this? Apparently, this mute man was trying to give them some type of message, but no one understood what he's talking about. He's putting one hand on the ceiling, one hand on a hut. I sune kamei de psachia. So they brought him in front of the psachia, in front of Mordechai. Amar lahu, he said to them, Is asar demiskarya gagos tzrifin? Is there a city that's called Gagos Tzrifin? Meaning he thought that essentially what the mute man is trying to say is roof hut, roof hut, roof hut. So he said, is there a place that's called roof hut? Right? Is there a place that's called Gagos Tzrifin or Tzrifin Gagos? Is there some place that has the name of this combination? Azlis letaman va'ashkechan. Sure enough, they found the place Gagos Tzrifin, and what happens? There in fact was barley there. So Psachia was intuitive enough to understand what the mute man was trying to say. Am Rabbi Yosa Bei Rebbe Bun Pam Achas Nishtaf Kala Olam Kulo. One time, literally the entire world was windswept, which means again also terrible drought. Velo hayu yodim heichan lahavi omer. They didn't know where they're going to bring the carbon omer from. V'haya taman chad ilim. So again, there was another mute person. Dahava yade al einei, v'yada al suchra. He put one hand on his eyes and one hand. So suchra, we'll say, is the door socket. So nobody knows what he's talking about. I sune legabe psachia. They brought him up for psachia. Amar Lun is asar de miskarya ein socher o socher ayin. Is there a place that's called ein socher? Because again, it's just combination of the 2 words. Or socher ayin. Again, ein is the eye, socher is the door socket. So what happens? Va'azlun taman va'ashkechan. Sure enough, what happens? They went out and they found the place ein socher. So also again, it's just interesting. Meaning, again, not that this is such a dramatic display of knowledge, but it's more intuition. It's more intuition. He's good at charades, right? He was the life of the party. So again, it's just an interesting idea, just in terms of also wisdom takes on many different forms. There's learned wisdom, and there's also intuitive wisdom. So Psachia, Mordechai has this learned wisdom, obviously, but he also has this intuitive wisdom as well. A little bit weiter. Gimel Nashim. Heviu kinehen. So there were 3 women who were bringing bird offerings. Achas omeres le'inasi. One says, I'm bringing this le'inasi. Now we'll see what this means in just a moment. Va'achas omeres liyamasi. One says, I'm bringing it. Amar Lun ba'aina sakant. So Psachia was there, and he said no. What she was saying is she had some type of sakana, some type of dangerous eye ailment, and she's bringing this bird offering as a hoda'ah. That's a nasi. Sovereign, Zusha amrit liyamasi. The one who said I'm bringing it liyamasi. Sovereign memar shofa'as kayam. They thought she was saying the same thing, that I'm flowing like a river, meaning that I'm still bleeding, and therefore I'm a zava. Amar Lun b'yama sakan. Mordechai said, no, that's not what she was saying. What she was saying is she was on a sea voyage, and she was in sakana, and because she was in sakana, she's bringing this carbon as an offering, as a hodah, as a thanksgiving offering. Zusha amrit lezivasi. The one who said that I'm bringing this for my zivus, sovereign memar zava mamish. She must be a zava, and that's how she's bringing it. Mordechai said no. Mordechai said, Amar Lun ze'ev ba lita lespina. this woman was in a dangerous situation, and her child was almost snatched by a wolf, and therefore, again, she's bringing the carbon as a hoda'ah, lizivasiv, because the zev, the wolf, almost took my child. They will say the point that's happening over here is what? That this was the greatness of Psalchi, of Mordechai, that he was able to... Now, how did he know this? How did he know this? Again, it's the same intuition. Apparently, again, he just saw, just based on how these women were acting, how they were talking, what they were saying, he understood that what they said was not, there was something deeper contained in their words, and that's why they called him Psachya, because he was able to open up that which was closed. He was able to, everyone else saw on the surface, he was able to see beneath the surface. Right, we'll say, well, Hashem continue tomorrow.